Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and once again it's time for the Q&A, so let's go ahead and knock this out. Alright, first question. If intermittent fasting makes adherence easier, do you think it outweighs the possible negative effects of building muscle and strength? And I had to ask him further questions, and he replied up above, and you guys can see a little bit of my answer down below. Alright, we've got to be perfectly honest here. Intermittent fasting, as far as optimizing anything goes, doesn't work. It's a very useful tool for diet adherence. Okay, if you're at maintenance calories, for example, and you're not overly concerned with a really efficient recomp, but you find that it lets you adhere to your caloric intake perfectly, it's a valuable tool. However, in terms of what happens in your body with muscle protein synthesis and everything else, you're going to recomposition slightly slower. In other words, it's not really ideal for muscle growth. And if you're not creating an ideal environment for muscle growth, particularly when you don't have a calorie surplus, it's just harder to gain muscle. It is simply harder to gain muscle. And it doesn't discount the fact that it's a very, very effective tool for a lot of people for weight loss. And I know plenty of people who use it, and I know at least some people who use it year-round. However, the people I know who use it year-round are not concerned with making quick changes in muscle growth. Okay, they're more or less roughly happy with where they are. Okay, they're basically happy with the amount of muscle and body fat that they have right now. They're not really concerned with making any sort of serious gains in the next year or two. So you need to understand that difference. It's a good maintenance system if it helps with diet adherence. And if it helps with diet adherence, it's phenomenal for loss. But here's what I would say. If you're trying to recomposition, you need to be focusing on just foods that are more filling and more satiating. And you need to be looking at a more ideal macronutrient ratio. Right? In other words, you might really enjoy higher fat foods, but carbs are slightly more anabolic and better for training. Okay, dietary fat is phenomenal when you're bulking to gain weight. It's phenomenal. Not particularly satiating, and it's not as anabolic calorie for calorie or as good for training fuel as, say, a little more carbs is. And it's a small difference. It's a subtle difference. But when you're trying to recomposition, subtle differences matter. When you're bulking, it's not a big deal, right? Not really a big deal at all. More caloric density, easier to get more food in, easier to gain weight, okay? Well, if you're recompositioning, you have to rethink some of that stuff. And if you're trying to just say, well, I do intermittent fasting so I can kind of eat the foods that I want to eat more and cram them into a window, rather than thinking about optimal food intakes, you're going to pay a price. You're going to have more enjoyment as far as what you consider to be enjoyment as far as food intake. Okay? But you're shooting for adherence while eating foods that you might enjoy more rather than what's going to be an ideal intake of your food options. That's the difference. So you're basically paying a small price in your muscle growth for that. From an optimized perspective, it is not good for really anything but true maintenance and for fat loss. It's going to put you at a disadvantage for everything else to some extent. And gaining muscle is hard enough as it is, right? We don't need to make it more difficult. All right, next question. If you keep your elbows locked, is it possible to tear a bicep on a mixed grip deadlift? That's a very nuanced question. I would say for someone who has done any amount of training for their tendons and things, in other words, here's what a lot of the better coaches I know out there say: do more lat work. Okay, people who've done plenty of lat work usually have pretty strong tendons through there, right? Now, we could argue that adding extra bicep work could help too, but either way, as long as you've done lots and lots of lat work, so you've learned to keep your back pulled back tighter, which also oftentimes helps you keep your arms tighter, does tend to build those tendons and things up, because again, you're loading them with a multi-joint exercise pretty often. And some really high rep curls and band curls can help, of course. If you've done those things and you're not using any anabolics, it might cause a problem. I would say it's just about impossible to tear a bicep with your elbow locked, if you have it correctly locked under those circumstances. However, someone who has really underdeveloped that area, they've underdeveloped the tendons, okay, not enough lat work or not doing any work at all really to train those tendons, or once you start abusing the wrong anabolics or using too much stuff, the risks of a bicep tear start going up, even if you have a locked bicep, right? Even if you have the elbow locked. So it's not as straightforward as that. But I mean, in terms of reasonable precautions, if you're completely natural, and I hate that term, let's just call it, if you don't use any anabolics that could compromise connective tissue, and you've taken general care of your connective tissue health, and you keep your elbows locked, I would say it's almost impossible. Right? It's very, 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 very unlikely. I don't want to say impossible completely, because it could happen, maybe, but the odds are so astronomically low that it should be a non-concern. Okay? It's usually weak tendons that are contributing along with the elbow bend. So it's not always as straightforward as that. All right, next question. Training for the Los Angeles Fire Department physical test, which is composed of several bodyweight movements, 4 reps with a minute, max pull-ups in 1 minute, max push-ups in 1 minute, etc. How would you adjust conjugate style training to incorporate this? Treat it as GPP, add in amrap sets. Thanks for all your awesome advice. I've been watching since the beginning of your YouTube journey. And you kind of see what I've written down there, that I do my GPP on my off days. And here's what you could do. Run your conjugate template as normal, right? Now, because these are body weight type movements, you don't want to be too fat. So if you've been, strength training and powerlifting and you've let yourself bulk too fat, probably not ideal if you're going to go do fire department. All right? And here's the thing. These tests are not particularly difficult. They want you to be in shape. But it sounds like to me your goal is to crush it and be in like the top 10%, or else you wouldn't even be asking. Because if you're a guy who's running conjugate and you lift and you've got decent body composition, you're probably going to be above average anyways on these. Okay? You're probably going to be. So it sounds like you're trying to maximize it. So yeah, I would do it as Metcon. Work it in as Metcon. Work it in as Metcon. On your off days, do it as GPP. Now, I would incorporate some sort of lower body stuff with it. Some people would say, well, why? Because you want to keep your heart rate up. You want to be used to doing these pull-ups and these push-ups with your heart rate and breathing elevated when you're fatigued, because they may throw you through other stuff first. A lot of times on these physical fitness tests, people are looking at stuff in isolation. And they're saying something like, oh, well, all I have to do is be able to do the push-ups. Well, they might have you be doing other stuff first. And I don't know the exact nature of what they're doing, but I promise you there's more to their physical fitness test than just pull-ups and push-ups inside of a minute. They may have you do other stuff first. And if that's the case, you need to be prepared to be able to do a lot of these in a short period of time as a rotation with other things. And the reason I say that is it'll get you into better shape. And then when you do them fresh, they're going to be even easier. So I would probably do something like 5 pull-ups, 5 push-ups, 5 body weight squats. You could do the step-ups like I used to do, right? Something like that. And repeat the rotation. Okay? Something like that. And I believe there's a name for that one. I forget what it's called now. There's a specific name for that in CrossFit as one of their little WODs. One of their easy body weight watts. But I would repeat that cycle, okay? And do it for several minutes. Because then you'll get used to jumping up and doing more pull-ups and more push-ups under fatigue, right? And you'll be good at clearing waste products between doing them. So you can do sub-maximal sets when you go to do them in a minute. Meaning you can take little tiny breathers and breaks. So I would work on doing that and get to where you can do 50 of these in a circuit. Because if you get to where you can do at least 10 circuits like that with 50, and you think about what happens in a minute, you're going to be pretty well prepared to knock out a bunch of work for a minute straight. Because this is going to take you several minutes, obviously, to do this 10 times. But I think that's a good benchmark to aim for. All right, guys, well, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time in part 2.